The Char 2C, also known as the FCM-2C, is a French super-heavy tank developed during World War I but not deployed until after the war. It was, in physical dimensions, the largest operational tank ever made. Development. The Char Dassault had model. The origins of the Char 2C have always been shrouded in a certain mystery. In the summer of 1916, probably in July, General Elie Couteau and Augustin Jean-Marie Morit, the Sub-Secretary of Artillery, verbally granted Forges et Chantiers de la Méditerranée, a shipyard in the south of France near Toulon, the contract for the development of a heavy tank, a Char Dassault, a grand model. At the time, French industry was very active in lobbying for defense orders, using the connections with high-placed officials and offices to obtain commissions. Development contracts could be very profitable even when not resulting in actual production, as they were fully paid for by the state. The French army had no stated requirement for a heavy tank, and there was no official policy to procure one, so the decision seems to have been taken solely on his personal authority. The reason he later gave was that the British tanks then in development by a naval committee seemed to be better devised as regarded layout, ventilation and fire protection, so a shipyard might improve on existing French designs. Exact specifications, if they ever existed, have been lost. FCM then largely neglected the project, apart from reaping the financial benefits. At the time, all tank projects were highly secret, and thereby shielded from public scrutiny. On the 15th of September 1916, the British deployed tanks in battle for the first time in the form of the Mark I, and a veritable tank euphoria followed, when the public mood in Britain had been growing ever darker as the truth of the failure of the Somme offensive could no longer be suppressed. Tanks offered a new hope of final victory. The French people now became curious as to the state of their own national tank projects. French politicians, not having been over-involved in them and leaving the matter to the military, were no less inquisitive. This sudden attention greatly alarmed Morit, who promptly investigated the progress that had been made at FCM and was shocked to find there was none. On the 30th of September he personally took control of the project. On the 12th of October, knowing that the Renault company had some months earlier made several proposals to build a heavy tracked mortar which had been rejected, he begged Louis Renault to assist FCM in the development of a suitable heavy vehicle. This request Renault obliged, even before knowing what the exact nature of the project would be. On the 20th of October, Morit ordered one prototype to be built by FCM. This development coincided with a political demand by Minister of Armament Albert Thomas to produce a tank superior to the British types. On the 7th of October he had requested Lloyd George to deliver some Marquis to France but had received no answer, correctly concluding that no such deliveries would materialize. On the 23rd of January 1917 he ordered that French tanks should be developed that were faster and more powerfully armed and armored than any British vehicle. He specified a weight of 40 tons, an immunity against light artillery rounds and a trench crossing capacity of 3.5 meters. Meanwhile, Renault had consulted his own team, led by Rodolphe Ernst Metzmeyer, which had been, since May 1916, in the process of designing the revolutionary Renault FD light tank. This work had not, however, stopped them from considering other tank types. Renault, always expecting his employees to provide new ideas instantly, had by this attitude encouraged the team to take a proactive stance, setting a pattern that would last until 1940, and to have various kinds of contingency studies ready for the occasion, including a feasibility study for a heavy tank. This fortunate circumstance stance allowed a full-size wooden mock-up to be constructed in a remarkably quick time. It was visited by the Sub-Secretary of State of Inventions Jules Louis Breton on 13 January 1917, who was much impressed and developed a keen interest in the project. The design was presented to the Consultative Committee of the Assault Artillery on 16 and 17 January 1917, after the basic concept had been approved on 30 December. This proposed tank was the most advanced design of its time. It was received very favorably, also because of the enthusiastic report by Breton, and a consensus began to form that the project was most promising and a potential war winner. It featured a 105 mm gun in a turret, had a proposed weight of 38 tons and 35 mm armor. The committee decided to have two prototypes developed, one with an electrical transmission, the other with a hydraulic transmission. In this period, both the French and the British military had become aware of severe mobility and steering problems with heavy tracked vehicles. The French designs paralleled extensive British experiments with all kinds of improved tank transmissions to solve them. Resistance to the project. In January 1917, the Ministry of Armament proposed to build three weight classes of tanks: light, medium and heavy tanks, the latter class corresponding to the new project. However, the FCM tank had already made a powerful and influential enemy. Brigadier Jean-Baptiste Eugène Estienne, commander of the new tank force, the assault artillery, closely cooperated with Renault in the development of the Renault FD, and through this connection was kept well informed of the other tank project. Estienne began to fear that the production of the heavy vehicle would use up all available production facilities, making the procurement of the much more practical Renault FD light tank impossible. He was not averse to the production of heavy tanks as such, but only in a limited number and on the condition it did not impede the manufacture of light tanks. That his fears were not unfounded became apparent when in November Morat tried to obstruct further development of the Renault FD, arguing that all available resources should be concentrated into heavy tank production. Alarmed, Estienne now wrote a letter to the Commander-in-Chief, General Joffre, dated 27 November 1916, and defending the light tank concept. In it he admitted that colossal landships might in certain circumstances have the uses, but pointed out that while it was as yet unproven that any workable heavy type could actually be developed, let alone produced in sufficient numbers by the French industry, it would be folly not to give priority to light tanks that could be constructed without delay. He insisted that Joffre use all his influence to bring about the cancellation of the heavy tank project. Joffre answered that Estienne was no doubt correct in his tactical and organizational analysis, but that he could not oblige him because political backing of the heavy tank was simply too strong. The Minister of Armament, Albert Thomas, had committed himself too openly to Morat's cause and did not dare to retract support now. Joffre advised Estienne not to worry too much, he would make sure at least that the Renault FD would not be cancelled. And precisely because heavy tank development would take such a long time, for the immediate future it would not get in the way of light tank production. There would surely be no harm in allowing some prototypes to be built. The Consultative Committee of the Assault Artillery had been created on 13 December 1916 and for the first time met on 17 December. During this first session it was reported that Renault and FCM were cooperating in a heavy tank project of 30 tons. Estienne on this occasion stressed that production should be orientated gravitated towards small types and very large types. During the next meeting on the 30th of December, SGN was surprised to discover that for no clear reasons a 105mm gun was planned. He himself preferred 75mm gun. SGN was absent on the crucial meeting of the 17th of January, but by letter informed the committee that he found the project well presented and satisfactory and agreed with the quick construction of two prototypes. He stated his preference for a 75mm over a 105mm gun. In December, Joffre was replaced as Supreme Commander by Robert Nivelle. In late January, Nivelle learned of the heavy tank project from SDN. He was much more alarmed than Joffre had been. On the 29th of January he wrote a letter to Minister Thomas, making clear that under no circumstances could the project be allowed to impede production of the Schneider CA. Thomas answered on the 5th of February that there was no danger of this anyway. He had just happened to affirm on the 1st of February that the policy of General Morat, who had already ordered the simultaneous development of three prototypes, the light and air version weighing 30 tons, having a length of 6.92 meters, with a suspension featuring 29 double road wheels, 4 main bogies and 5 top rollers, powered by 2 Renault 200 horsepower engines and to be equipped with a 75mm gun. To fulfill the original order of the 20th of October, the B version of 45 tons with a hull lengthened to 7.39 meters, armed with a 75mm gun and 2 machine guns, with a suspension featuring 30 road wheels, 5 main bogies and 6 top rollers, using a new 380 horsepower engine and a petro-hydraulic transmission, and the C version of 62 tons with a 75mm gun, a length of 9.31 meters, a suspension featuring 45 road wheels, 6 main bogies and 9 top rollers, and 4 engines of 110 horsepower combined with a petro-electrical transmission. Nivelle's misgivings were reinforced by inquiries from a parliamentary financial commission led by Pierre Renaudel. A plan by Breton to immediately order 50 vehicles more or less identical to the mock-up was therefore rejected. The 1st of February order of 2 additional prototypes was confirmed by the CCAS on the 7th of February. Eventually the FCM-1A would be developed with a 105mm gun, and the FCM-1B would use a petrol-mechanical transmission. At first, progress with the FCM-1A prototype was satisfactory. FCM Director Moritz was assured by Renault in January 1917 that the desired 200 HP engines were reliable and would pose no danger to the project. Moritz then predicted that the first prototype would be ready by the 1st of May 1917. On the 10th of April 1917 he still assumed that the first trials could have begun within 5 weeks. On the 16th of April the Nivelle offensive failed completely, and the first use of French tanks was likewise a failure. In reaction, Thomas ordered all tank production and projects to be ended. This led to an emergency alliance between STN and Morat to bring about a reversal of this decision. When Thomas happened to visit Russia, Morat surreptitiously ordered a restart of the tank projects. On his return, an enraged Thomas caused Morat to be fired, thus removing STN's greatest rival. Meanwhile, there were unexplained delays in the delivery of the engines and the gearbox by Renault. On the 5th of June, FCM could only take note that the promised pieces had not arrived yet. On the 24th of June, the Ministry of Armament complained about the situation. On the 13th of August, Breton personally inquired with Renault 1A and was informed it would take at least another 3 weeks. A possible explanation of the delays might be a deliberate decision by Renault to give priority to other projects. During a meeting of the CCAS on the 18th of October, Moritz could at last announce that trials could begin on the 20th of November. In that meeting, Estienne was critical of heavy tanks. The infantry has as much need of large tanks as it needs 400 mm cannon. It has need of small tanks as much as it needs 37 mm and machine guns. The FCM-1A. On the 17th of November, Director Moritz, introducing to the CCAS the forthcoming presentation of the FCM-1A prototype, explained it was a test bed that did not exactly correspond to the original version specifications. In fact, the company, in its efforts to get an actual running vehicle ready as soon as possible, had built a prototype that was largely based on the original mock-up and thus was much closer to the B concept, albeit with a 105 mm gun and a petrol mechanical transmission. The hydraulic transmission had been abandoned by the CCAS on the 10th of May. A detailed Army report on the plans of January 1917 survives that can give a good impression of the qualities of the eventual prototype. The vehicle was the largest tank built until the date. It had a length of 8.35 meters, a width of 2.842 meters, a hull height of 1.98 meters, a turret roof height of 2.785 meters and a total height, cupola included, of 3 meters. It was also the first tank vehicle that offered a real protection against artillery rounds. The front hull was covered by 35 mm armor plate. The same was the all-around thickness of the turret. The sides and rear were protected by 21 mm plate, the top and roof by 15 mm. The total weight of the tank was 41.4 tons. Its empty hulk weight was 22.1 tons, 17.5 tons accounted for by the hull, of which 5.5 tons of armor, and 4.6 tons by the turret, including 1.3 tons of armor. The hull of the FCM-1A was very elongated, in order to cross wide trenches. It was more or less compartmentalized into 4 sections that however were not separated by bulkheads. A relatively short driver compartment at the front, a fighting compartment with a turret at its top, a larger munitions room and finally a large engine compartment at the rear. The last was enlarged at both sides over the tracks, to create room for long rectangular fuel tanks. The front of the hull followed the profile of the tall climbing faces of the tracks and therefore gradually curved upwards, ending in a high, vertical nose plate. The glacis plate behind it was oriented almost horizontally and connected at its rear to the vertical top front plate of the driver compartment. As the turret ring was larger than the width of the hull, it partly rested on rounded lateral extensions. The turret was a truncated cone with the roof sloping down to the front, so that inside view its profile was wedge-shaped. Originally a crew of 7 had been planned, but in December 1917 this had been reduced to 6. A commander in the left of the turret who also had the responsibility of aiming the gun, a second man in the right of the turret who combined the functions of gunner, machine gunner and loader, a standing assistant loader handing newspaper rounds to the loader. At first 2 of these had been seen as necessary: a driver, a front machine gunner, and a mechanic who doubled as a rear machine gunner. Armament: the main armament was a 105 mm gun, a cannon and a 105 Kort Schneider, shortened to reduce its recoil so that it could fit into a turret. It fired a He shell with 4 kilograms of explosives and a muzzle velocity of 240 meters per second. The large hull allowed for a large ammunition stock of 122 rounds, 18 stacked in 3 vertical rows of 6 in front of him. were directly accessible to the gunner-loader. 2 batches of 8 were stowed below the fighting compartment floor and 44, stacked in 4 vertical rows of 11, lined each wall of the ammunition room. The commander pointed the gun by observing the target through a vane sight fitted on the turret roof from his rectangular cupola. There were 2 Hotchkiss 8mm machine guns in fixed ball mount positions. Reserve machine guns of pistols could be fired through 5 vertical slits that could be plugged, 1 at the rear of the turret, 2 at the turret sides and 2 at the hull sides below the turret rear. Driveline and amp suspension. In the prototype, a single Renault 220 HP 12-cylinder engine was installed, allowing a maximum speed of 10 km per hour at 1,200 revolutions per minute. The minimum speed was 2 km per hour. The transmission was mechanical, using a disc clutch. The sprocket was at the rear, the idler at the front. The suspension consisted of bogies sprung by leaf springs, of 4 wheels each with alternating external and internal flanges. The tracks were 600 mm wide, resulting in a ground pressure of 0.6 kg per square centimeter. Ground clearance was 400 mm. The center of gravity was in the middle of the vehicle, at a level of 1 meter above the ground. The design prided itself on not having any overhanging sections at the front of the rear, as had greatly hampered the mobility of the earlier French Schneider CA-1 and Saint-Chamond tanks. The tank could overcome a 1-meter-high vertical obstacle and cross a trench 3.5 meters wide. Ergonomics. Much attention had been given to ergonomics, more its stated motive in having the tank designed by a shipyard. The vehicle was less cramped than earlier designs, the crew being able to more or less walk through the hull with only a slight crouch. The mechanic could access the engine at both sides. The commander could communicate with the driver, the front machine gunner and the mechanic via speaking tubes. External communications were the responsibility of the mechanic, who could lift a little hatchet just behind the turret to give signals by fanions, pyrotechnic devices or electrical lights. The tank could be entered through the cupola, but each member had oval around escape hatches above and below him. The Char 2C is ordered. On the 20th of December 1917, the first prototype was ready to be shown to an investigating commission of the CCAS, with actual trials being held at La Seine-sur-Mer on 21 and the 22nd of December. It had been replaced as head of the commission by Estienne. British and American observers were present. The FCM-1, with its futuristic appearance, made an excellent impression on those present. Moritz demonstrated that the vehicle was effortlessly capable of crossing 3.5 meters wide trenches, climb 90 centimeters high walls and descend into and climb out of again 6 meters wide and 4 meters deep craters. In woods, it could break a 28 centimeters thick pine tree and run over a 35 centimeters thick one. A speed of 6 km per hour was attained. The main problem was that it proved difficult to steer the tank due to its extreme track length and insufficient chain link profile. The track would easily slip when braked, though it was on no occasion thrown. The aircraft engine tended to overheat, and its basic lack of power resulted in a maximum 65% climbing slope. Though the first, shortened 105 mm Schneider cannon had been received in October, the first live firing tests were only held on 5 and 7 February 1918, with satisfactory results. Discussing the results of the trials, on 4 January 1918, the technical department of the Artillerie Spéciale concluded that the FCM-1A seemed a powerful combat vehicle capable of having an important negative effect on enemy morale. Already on the 30th of December, Minister of Munitions Louis Char had thought that France hadn't a minute to lose and suggested to Président du Conseil Georges Clemenceau to spend 50 million French francs to construct 100 FCM-1 as the first 15 to be delivered from July 1918 onwards, in order to have a strength of 80 vehicles on the 31st of December. However, Clemenceau would leave the decision to Estienne. General Philippe Pétain, the new high commander of the French army, asked Estienne to use his position to end the project. Estienne told Pétain that this was ill-advised while the public was questioning why these heavy tanks had not been produced. Besides, the Allies would only consent to give France 700 of the new Mark 8 Liberty design if France had made at least a token effort to produce its own heavy tanks. Thus the French authorities had to delay the project while outwardly endorsing it. Estienne had already set this course by choosing the heaviest version, the C, for production, requiring a completely new prototype, causing a considerable delay. Then Pétain demanded unreasonably high production numbers, thus delaying planning and initiating a political row. Pétain asked for 300 heavy tanks to be ready by March 1919, causing a quarrel to erupt between Clemenceau, who was both Prime Minister and Minister of War, and Char, the Minister of Armament, who felt it was impossible to provide the labor and steel required. Meanwhile, Estienne and Pétain complicated the issue with further demands. Pétain asked for special pontoons, and Estienne demanded battering rams and electronic mine detectors to be fixed. When the war ended, not a single tank had been built. At first, the production order for the Char 2C was cancelled. Despite the end of hostilities, however, strong political pressure to adopt new heavy tank projects remained, as there was now a considerable surplus capacity in the heavy industry. To stop this, the Direction de l'Artillerie d'Assaut, an instigation of Estienne, decided in April 1919 to procure 10 Char 2Cs after all, and use this as an argument to reject any other projects. This was not completely successful. As late as 1920 it was proposed to the Section Technique des Appareils de Combat to build a 600-ton tank with 250 mm armor. At FCM Jamy and Savatier finished the Char 2C prototype, the other 9 tanks being built almost simultaneously. All 10 were delivered in 1921 and modified by the factory until 1923. They would be the last French tanks to be produced for the home market till the Char D1 pre-series of 1931. Description: the Char 2C had a loaded weight of 69 tons, partly because of its armor, 45 mm at the front, 22 mm at the sides, but much of it just because of its huge size. The armor was among the thickest of World War I era tanks, though by modern standards this would be considered thin. It is still easily the largest tank ever taken into production. With the tail fitted, the hull was over 12 meters long. Within its sample frame there was room for 2 fighting compartments. The forward compartment was crowned by a 3-man turret mounting a long 75 mm gun, and the second, at the rear of the tank, was topped by a machine gun turret. Both turrets had stroboscopic cupolas. The 3 independent 8mm machine gun positions at the front gave protection against infantry assault. The Char 2C is the only super heavy tank ever to attain operational status. A super heavy tank is not simply a tank that is very heavy, but one that is much heavier than regular tanks of its period. The next operational tank to approach its weight would be the German Tiger II heavy tank of World War II. The fighting compartments were connected by the engine room. Each track was powered by its own 250 horsepower engine via an electrical transmission. Top speed was 15 km/h. 7 fuel tanks, containing 1,260 liters, gave it a range of 150 kilometers. The suspension contained 39 interleaving road wheels on each side, making for a total of 90 wheels on the tank. To man the tank required a crew of 12. Driver, commander, gunner, loader, 4 machine gunners, mechanic, electrician, assistant electrician, mechanic and a radio operator. Some sources report 13, probably due to pictures of the crews that included the company commander.